feel like green is the appropriate color for summer when there's so much green in the world. But I always like to ask some test questions, so this is a repeat. So who knows what green means during this long, long season after Pentecost, which stretches all the way until Advent, until just before Christmas? What's that? It does mean life, and more specifically, what does it mean liturgically? Does anybody know? Ordinary. Yes, it's ordinary time, which is actually my favorite time of the year, because this is when, in the readings for the church year, we really dig into Jesus' ministry and his teachings, his parables. And as we talked about last week at Breakfast Church, this is a whole section in the gospel story called the Journey to Jerusalem. And so Jesus has left Galilee, which is in the north, where the Sea of Galilee is and where his hometown is, and he's moving on to Jerusalem. And he's literally on the way, but the way, of course, is symbolic of the spiritual way, the spiritual journey. And so there are all sorts of lessons that he's teaching his disciples, some hard lessons about discipleship, as we learned last week. And there are some hard lessons here, but this is actually more about Jesus' method, his method for ministry and his method for mission. This is what church looked like, or what Jesus imagined it to look like. It didn't look like coming to a building on a Sunday morning and sitting in a hard pew and reading prayers. What does Jesus have his disciples do? Yeah, he has them go out. And what are some of the specifics of his method? First, yes, Anne.
Well, he wants them to strip down, no sandals, no nothing, so that they don't appear to be any higher status.
Yeah, that's really the key line there. The first that I'm going to mention, though, is he tells them to go out how? 2 by 2. So they're in pairs, they're in small groups. Jesus' method, it's not a big institutional program. It's small groups. So there's a kind of intimacy in the style of Jesus' ministry. And then as Anne said, he says, carry no bag, right? Take no purse, take no sandals. And so, Anne, you said that that's about not being above other people, right? In a position of power.
I know that's true because you taught that to us.
Oh my goodness, you have a good memory. Well, I've got a great story about what Jesus says here, carry no bag, because I learned it the hard way. I went on a mission trip many decades ago now when I was in law school in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was very involved in the life of the chaplaincy on campus. And I spoke Spanish, and so I helped the chaplain, Becca Stevens, I talk about her all the time. I helped her organize a mission trip to Ecuador. So we went down there, and before going, we got really excited, and we learned about all the things that we needed to bring. And so I, of course, being sort of the goody two-shoes that I was at the time, I went out and I got this fabulous hiking backpack, and I got my mosquito netting and my tent and my cliff guards or whatever they were called at the time. And I had all of my clothes laid out. We were going to a very remote part of Ecuador, and so we had to be prepared pretty much for a camping experience. So the flight to Ecuador was through Miami, and then you get to Ecuador, and the airport there was pretty much a landing strip and a little building. And so we got off the plane, and everybody's waiting for, their luggage to come out. And so Becca, she got her luggage, and then, all of the other people on the trip, they got their luggage, and we're waiting, and mine doesn't come out. And so we finally realized it was not coming out, and basically what I had for this mission trip was what I was wearing. So best laid plans, right? So anyway, that taught me really fast what it means to live vulnerably and to come at life from a posture of vulnerability, I call it. Because I had to depend on everybody else on that trip for everything. I had to depend for every outfit on someone who had maybe had an extra t-shirt, an extra pair of jeans. And of course, the day we were going to leave, then the bag arrives. But I was like, okay, God, I get the message. Carry no bag, take no purse, take no sandals. So that's the main point there. And what else does Jesus say? There's some other advice there. He says, remain in the same house and eat everything that they give you. So this is all about relying on others. It's really the same message. Relying on others, learning to be dependent, learning to be vulnerable. And this is exactly the opposite of how most of us like to be most of the time. Because most of the time, we all like to be secure, right? And if we go out and do ministry, we want to be the ones, right, who are dispensing good things, to other people in need. Jesus is telling us it's actually the other way around. Rely on other people. So this is actually about mission, yes, but it's more about initiation. Jesus is actually teaching the disciples how to live vulnerably. He's saying this is how to do it. You can't preach vulnerability if you're not actually trying to live it. So go out and try to do it. Here, of course, is what our friend Richard Rohr has to say about living vulnerably in this passage in particular. One reason we Christians have misunderstood many of Jesus' teachings is that we have not seen Jesus' way of education as that of a spiritual master. He wants to situate us in a larger life, which he calls the reign of God. Yet the initiatory thrust of Jesus' words is hidden in plain sight. Study, for example, his instructions to the 12 disciples when he sent them into society in a way very vulnerable. No shoes or wallet, like sheep among wolves. How did we miss this? Note that it was not an intellectual message as much as it was an urban plunge, a high-risk experience where something new and good could happen. It was designed to change the disciples much more than it was meant for them to change others. Today, we call it a reverse mission, where we ourselves are changed and helped by those whom we think we are serving. Listen to that last line. We ourselves are changed and helped by those whom we think we are serving. And that's pretty much the reality of any kind of ministry with the wider community. It's always like that. I will say that yesterday we had such a wonderful experience at the soup kitchen, and I knew that I was the one being transformed. And I had a brief conversation with a woman who shared with me that she had been outside in the rainstorm, in a thunderstorm, the night before. And she was talking to me with just such a sense of gratitude and joy on her face and a smile that was just beaming. And I thought to myself, my goodness, if she can have this kind of joy, I wish I could have a fraction of it, and maybe I'm going to start trying. And in fact, after that, when each person came, I tried to smile. And I noticed that there was this mirroring, and most of the time I got a big smile in return. So the point is that we are the ones transformed. And Jesus' message here is about our being transformed. Not so much what we're doing to others, but how do we engage in the spiritual journey so that we are the ones who are transformed. And the key to this, the key that unlocks it, is vulnerability, is a willingness to be vulnerable. And that is probably the hardest thing to do, but it is absolutely the method of the spiritual path. And I think of St. Francis is not inside with us, he's outside. If you haven't seen the mural of St. Francis, he's behind the tent. But St. Francis practiced a ministry basically of begging. He basically had his brothers, his fellow friars, go out with a begging bowl each day. Buddhist monks still do this. They start each day with an empty bowl, and they trust that it will be filled. They trust that it will be filled. And in addition, it represents the kind of posture, not just of vulnerability, but of emptiness. If you are so full of yourself, right, of your thoughts, you think that you're right, how can God enter in? How can God enter in? So this is a posture of being vulnerable and empty so that God can fill us. Richard Rohr goes on to say, when read in light of classic initiation patterns, Jesus' intentions are very clear. He wanted his disciples then and now to experience the value of vulnerability. Jesus invites us to a life without baggage so we can learn how to accept others. He did not teach us to hang up a shingle to get people to attend our services. He taught us exactly the opposite. We should stay in their homes and eat their food. One can only imagine how different history would have been had we provided this initiatory training. We might have borne a message of cosmic sympathy instead of imperialism, religious wars, and violence against so-called heretics, Jews, pagans, and native peoples in the name of Jesus. But there were always people like Francis of Assisi who made Jesus' gospel their life map. Once you know that your life is not about you, then you can also trust that your life is your message. You do not try to think yourself into a new way of living, but you first live in a new way from a new vantage point, and your thinking changes by itself. So it's hard to do this. I can't say that I do it with any mastery or real success, but I think we all have had experiences where vulnerability unlocks something. And again, I think back to that time for me in Nashville, Tennessee, when I was with Becca Stevens, and that's when I was coming out, not only spiritually, but sexually. And I was very, very conflicted. This was many years ago, and it was a different time, especially in Nashville, Tennessee, which back then was regarded as the buckle of the Bible Belt. And not long after this mission trip that I described to Ecuador, I went into Becca's office. I wanted to talk to her because I was really struggling. But she wasn't there, but her parish administrator was there. And I said, is Becca here? I'd really like to talk with her. I'm really struggling with something. And she said, no, she's not, but would you like to talk with me? And I said, what the hell? And I said, well, I'm really struggling. I was sort of circuitous, I'm really struggling with my feelings for my classmate. And she just looked at me with the kindest, gentlest eyes in her southern Nashville twang. She said, are you gay? And then she said, Brett, it's okay. I'm gay too. And after that, for the next 3 years that I was in law school, she was like my best buddy and my best confidant. But it was an example of being willing to take the smallest risk of being vulnerable, and then God did the rest. So I just want to say again that Jesus' method is always about vulnerability. It's not about power. It's not about security. It's not about control. It's about vulnerability, because that unlocks the love of God. In the name of God, Father, Son,